Over at BangTheBook.com, we are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Lots of really great stuff going on over there. Parker Michaels still having a fantastic NHL season, so you want to hop on board with him. My NBA and NHL situational betting articles have been posted. I'll take a look at my college football power ratings here this afternoon. Again, obviously, we've got some guys sitting out the bowl games, things of that sort. Do have to make some updates with that. I have an NFL opening line report for you later on here today as well. We've got just about all 39 college football bowl games. We're only missing the Cotton Bowl because I forgot that I assigned it to myself. So I'll write that one up here this afternoon, and then we'll have all 39 bowl game previews ready to go for you over at BangTheBook.com. Bookmark the landing page for those. Has links to each individual bowl game as well as the matchup page over at BangTheBook.com. Want to make sure you're fully prepared for these bowl matchups. Don't forget that Bang the Book promo code over at DSI Sportsbook, BTB and the number 200, 100% deposit match bonus for the Sportsbook, 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino as well. At BetDSI, it's only a game until you bet it. Two guests on the program here today. We'll start things off with Joe Everett from DraftScouts and Insider Football. Joe, how's it going today, man?
Going great. What a Sunday. I mean, no-look passes, fat guy touchdowns, hook and laterals, huge upsets. That's mass hysteria for you. Can't beat it, man.
No, definitely not. And, we had a lot of good games, a lot of interesting developments. Of course, the Sunday Night Football game was a little bit of a dud from a score standpoint with a lot of turnovers. But, for a lot of handicapping purists out there, that was a game that, A, wound up pretty good for them, and B, wound up being a game that, I think showed us a lot about both teams. And it's important here at this time of the year, Joe, to have a good idea of what you're working with. And before we get to the Monday night game, I want to start with that here because we talk about motivation, and especially at this time of the year with the bowl games, and we talk about situational spots in the NBA and the NHL, things of that sort, where maybe teams aren't as motivated, maybe teams aren't as focused. Well, you think about the teams that shouldn't be focused at this time of the year, teams that have questionable motivation. The Jets went outright over the Bills. Miami wins outright over New England in that crazy ending. You've got Cincinnati. The Chargers were really never outside the number in that game. Cincinnati hanging in that one. Oakland outright over Pittsburgh. We'll talk about the Steelers here in a little bit. But a lot of these teams that we expected to have no motivation, having a lot of it here in Week 14.
Yeah, and I think, it's motivation for maybe different sorts of reasons, which, we'll get into the Panthers. I think they may have a different kind of motivation, but that Jets team, I think it is a bit of Todd Bowles. They don't necessarily hate him. There's a lot of players on that defense that I think really would love to have him stay just because of the scheme and system they're running, and I think that's part of just survival instincts. They run this scheme. I'm here doing this job. What happens when they change defenses? I don't have a job. And then somebody gets drafted, I'm an afterthought. And I think that's what, in some of these situations where you may have a coach on the outs, that's definitely what some of these players will, bow up and really play hard just because not only maybe they know it's over in the case of Bowles. Well, one last try for Coach Bowles is what I'm going to go out there and do if I know him. And if I know any player worth their salt, they're going to play hard, especially if they know it's their last game or two. So I think those are some of those instances that may be cropping up. Like, no, there's no postseason aspirations here, but there is relationships that go on in those different buildings for teams. And I think that's probably what you're seeing, especially in that Jets case, I think.
Well, and I think, too, and maybe this becomes a betting angle here over the last 3 weeks. I'm not entirely sure. But if you have a coach that is well-liked by the players, and it does seem like Todd Bowles is going to be fired, irrespective of what happens here over the last 3 weeks for the Jets, but they did come out and play in that second half, and more importantly, they came and played in that fourth quarter. You look at a different situation like Tampa Bay, where I think it's just dysfunction and toxicity from the top down with the Buccaneers right now. They go up 14-3 on New Orleans in the first 25-0. Saints wind up covering the number there when it looked like they didn't have a snowball's chance in hell at doing that. But Tampa Bay didn't really show up in the second half. Now, maybe the Saints are just that good. Maybe Buffalo's just, that below average of a team. But maybe this is a second half betting angle to look at from a live betting standpoint of, these teams that may have to go to battle for their coaches. Some of them may do it. Some of them may not.
Well, and suspect teams to where you're wondering what's going on during the week from a conditioning perspective. There's some teams out there that play 60 minutes. Tampa Bay is definitely not one of those. And I hate to keep bringing up Carolina, but that's like what I've got in the notes for them. It's been how many second halves where they just come out of that locker room completely flat. And that's the question marks that are starting to come up. But I think with Tampa Bay, they're such a mystery. It's tough to get involved in games against the Bucs or with the Bucs, certainly. But, them coming out flat in the second half, that's not a surprise to them with Cotter being on the outs. It's just, what to expect because that's still the worst part for Tampa. There's a ton of talent on that field. I think everybody knows that's listening to this podcast, like the talent they have at the perimeter. Those two quarterbacks can function. How many passing yards they've got on the ledger here that are accounted for nothing, that come to no scores. It's just, that's probably one of the most frustrating teams in the NFL is the Buccaneers.
All right, let's look at a couple of teams here that have a lot to play for this evening. Minnesota Vikings at the Seattle Seahawks. This is your quintessential sharp versus public split game of the week. Minnesota getting a lot of love in the influential community. Seattle getting more of the love out there from the public bettors. Obviously, great home field advantage for a Monday nighter here with the 12th man in Seattle. But this is a number that was 3.5 at some places early in the week. It's come down to 3. The Seahawks are still minus 15, minus 20 out there with that minus 3 price tag. But with what appears to be very sharp money here on the Minnesota side this week, maybe we see a 3 flat, maybe a +3, minus 15 as we get closer to kickoff here, Joe. But, right now, as you look at how things set up, Seattle 7-5, they'd be the first wild card team right now. Minnesota 6-5-1. But win or lose for the Vikings here this week, things could not have gone better for them. The Panthers lost and looked pretty bad in the process, as we'll talk about. The Eagles lost to the Dallas Cowboys in overtime. Redskins, they're a disaster right now, and maybe Josh Johnson starting next week for them. Things working out pretty well for the Vikings here this week, but obviously they'd still love to get that win here tonight.
Yeah, they had one of their best Sundays of the season and didn't even touch the field. You can't beat that. But in this one, I think they win the Kendricks Bowl here. Brother versus brother for probably the last time in their careers. It should be fun. I think the Vikings move the ball. Cousins is going to shred, is what I see. They'll probably avoid the Flowers kid on that side, but I think the other corner, one of the twins, is Shaquille Griffin's probably he may have a rough game because if it's Thielen or Diggs, they're going to get open. I know Diggs is nursing a knee injury. He was limited all week, but I think that's just sort of maintenance. He's just going to have to be on top of that knee pretty much the rest of the season out. And if they make the playoffs, that's really something to consider how long Diggs can go with this. I know he's a tough SOB, but he was limping around in that last Patriots game, if I recall. So this is going to something you'll just have to monitor all week with him. I'm hoping they use a ton of Dalvin Cook in here, get him in space because Bobby Wagner, I think he's a little dinged up. And then Kendricks is the one that's questionable actually with the rib injury. So that's I'm looking at the wrong side, but I think they're going to use the passing game. They're going to use the high-low. Rudolph and Cook will work them, and then they'll work with spread. Those other two receivers are starting to play well for the Vikings, Treadwell and then Aldrick Robinson. I think Robinson's got a job just because he played with Cousins in Washington, but they're going to get that communication issue worked out. I don't like the side a ton just because of that. The Seahawks environment, that's still that stadium, it's a tough place to play, but they'll have their way with that secondary. And then on the other side of the ball, I think Doug Baldwin not playing is still a problem. He's questionable, but he didn't practice all week, so that lack of chemistry is going to show up. And then Fluker, he's not going to play. So that kind of takes away from the run game. The Carson kids, he's got a dislocated finger, the running back. So they've got a three-way attack. They'll probably be good there. I just don't know if they keep up with the Vikings. And I'm looking at that 46. I think it's 46. That seems high to me. I'd be leaning under, and if I had to pick a side, I'd go Vikings. I think Cousins has a rebound game and outduels Dangerous here.
Well, one of the problems with Kirk Cousins, and maybe this isn't completely his fault, but Kirk Cousins here against playoff teams as the starting quarterback, this is both this season with the Vikings and also in his Redskins career, 3-18 straight up, 5-15-1 against the spread, against teams that are going to the playoffs. And right now, as things currently stand, the Seahawks would be going to the playoffs. So Kirk Cousins is a guy that really doesn't step up in the spotlight here at all. He's a guy that is capable of putting up numbers, as we saw year in and year out there in Washington, but getting over the hump against good competition, something that is problematic for him. Now, this is a huge game for us at Bang the Book specifically because the people that we're trying to chase down in the Golden Nugget, many of whom have had good weeks here so far, are on the Vikings. We have the Seahawks looking to go, against Minnesota there. We talked about the Vikings last week, and just they ran out of gas against the Patriots. And maybe there's something more to that. Maybe it was just, going up against the Patriots and this and that. They do have the extra day to prepare here, but this is not a good spot. Extra day or not. Going out to Foxborough last weekend, now you go all the way up to Seattle this weekend. Should be something of a physical with Thielen and Diggs both battling what seems to be, a couple of injuries here at this point in time. I don't know. I mean, I wish both teams were fully healthy coming into this game. I wish it was a truer handicap in that regard. I certainly like the Seattle side that we would have, some skin in the game with here in our contests. But, I think the interesting thing about this game here, Joe, and you'll probably agree with me here on this point, is what this game means long term. Because if Seattle gets this game, moves to 8-5, Vikings fall to 6-1, they'd still control their own destiny. But Seattle's up a game and a half with the head-to-head tiebreaker here on the Vikings. I kind of wonder what, Seattle looks like here in the coming weeks. Do they close this thing out strong? Do they try to get to that 9th win, which should give them a wild card spot no matter what? I think looking long-term here means almost just as much as this game for those that don't have it in a contest or something like that.
Well, it definitely would make that Kansas City game kind of a free-for-all because you'd have to imagine they could handle the Niners and the Cards. And, I mean, basically it's 10 wins should get you out in the NFC for that wild card. I really think at this point, like I don't want to say house money, but no, you're right on the spot too. Vikings with this travel, they've got a chance, Seattle, to not only just steal this game but finish strong, get a home game to open up the playoffs. So yeah, I mean, the big picture, this is a huge game for Seattle. So they've got the home. It's going to be tough. I mean, they could take the shots with Tyler Lockett, and yes, David Moore has had some good games, but the one big game he had was against Carolina's backups, Captain Munnerlyn and then Corn Elder. There's going to be a little different thing with Xavier Rhodes. I know Trey Waynes will not play, but still, Lockett and Moore, I think without Baldwin, it's going to be tough. And then blocking Hunter, Griffin, and Weatherly with that line, Dangerous is going to be running for his life in this one. I guess that's why I might just talk myself into an under here. But I think points both sides could be a little tough to come by. These two defenses, they're no joke, run a similar scheme and real physical on the perimeters. It's tough to get open against these guys. If I had to give the edge, obviously I'm Minnesota in it. But, yeah, I'm sticking with that. 46 seemed a little high to me.
All right, so let's recap Week 14 here, and we'll go ahead and start with the Chiefs and Ravens game. And I did take the Chiefs in the Super Contest. I like their chances of moving the football here against Baltimore, and they did to a degree. They did only have 5.3 yards per play, well below the 7 yards per play they were averaging coming into this game, but still racked up 441 yards, still had 30 first downs, and Patrick Mahomes threw for 377 and 2 touchdowns in the win here for Kansas City. Big win for them, too, because with that miracle in Miami or miracle at Hard Rock Stadium, whatever the hell they're calling it, now the Chiefs up 2 games on New England for the home field race in the AFC. And now, of course, New England tied with Houston for the 3rd spot. So, now New England really has to battle to stay in one of those top two places and get that bye during the wild card round, which it appears that they need because Tom Brady not really looking like the Tom Brady of old here so far this season. But in any event, Kansas City, big win for them. And I think, too, Joe, that this is one of those things, we talk about teams developing an identity, teams having to learn how to win, this and that. Early in the season, it was very easy for the Chiefs. They just scored a bunch of points and outscored everybody. To see them get a grittier type of win here, I think shows the maturation process of both this team and of Pat Mahomes.
It's a big confidence builder, I think. Not that they were suffering on that end, but it's winning in different ways. It's flat out Mahomes. There's nobody like him. That 4th and 9, sprinting to the right and across his body to Hill, and then the Hill limping around on a bum heel. His wrist is banged up, toughen it out. But the no-look pass, of course, those are the ones that are going to show up on the highlight reel. But there was one. He scrambled 2 different directions, then buys extra time. He's going to his left, fires a BB over the middle to his right to Kelsey with a guy draped all over him. There's some, Dan Marino said it back in the day, you can't defend the perfect pass. There's sometimes you can't defend a guy that can make the perfect pass in horrible situations. He made some boneheaded mistakes. The scramble where he just bobbled the football out of his own grasp. Like, I don't know what he's like, holding it like a bag of groceries. That was pretty boneheaded there. I mean, that's the rookie that he should be coming out kind of thing. I mean, it's in his second year, but first year starting, there's still some of those moments. But, there's just nothing like it. The escapability he's got, we all knew he had the cannon, but extending these plays, buying the time like he does, and I've not seen a quarterback changing his throwing platform like that and adjusting. Like, he still throws frozen ropes off balance, off one foot. He's never got his feet set. In fact, he almost prefers to throw a jump pass, and the thing is still, it's flying there. It's on the numbers. It's on the money every time. I don't know that there's a quarterback like this. Maybe there's other quarterbacks with stronger arms, but there's not many mistakes. The kid don't miss. And when he really refines his game, look out. But the Chiefs, bottom line, I think you hit it on the head. They're missing Kareem Hunt. They're having to find different ways without Sammy Watkins. It's a degree taken off this offense. When you don't have that deep threat, it's changed their game plan. They're more spreaded out, short passing game. They're having to use DeMarcus Robinson and Conley now in absence to make up for that lack of production. But it's a lot of it's what I'm worried about is falling on Hill. And Hill with these injuries, that kid, what he's playing through right now, it's like even after all these great plays, he takes it 40-plus yards, and then he's limping back to the huddle. It really shows off how much this means to him and what he's playing for. And, boy, I guess he is the type of player, seeing what happened to Kareem Hunt. Man, I'm just going to stay in this building and play as hard as I can. But I think they're at a different degree right now. They're finding themselves on offense, and they're lethal. I think the Chargers, looking at that game on Thursday, that line's just flat out wrong. With the Thursday problems we've seen on these away teams in short weeks, that Chiefs all day. Unless something happens to Tyreek Hill between now and then, or Kelsey and Mahomes, but those three play. I don't see how Kansas City loses that one at Arrowhead. I know Bosa's back and playing well, but this Chiefs team, there's a vibe going, and when they're in Kansas City, I don't know who's going to beat them. Baltimore basically carbon copied that Broncos plan where the Broncos almost had them, and still Pat got out of it. It's got to be confounding to be a defense and try and game plan for this guy, and then he extends the play, flip-flops the field, and throws a pellet across the field for 40 yards. It's like there's no defense for that. I'm sorry. You did your best, but try again. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200.
Well, that was the thing. I started looking at the odds screen here this morning because for reasons that no one on this show needs to hear about, Sunday was a pretty rough day for me. But I started looking at that game here for Thursday night and looking at that line, and I will tell you, it did catch me off guard a little bit. I mean, you've got this Kansas City team here that they're winning in different ways, as you mentioned. The defense has gotten a little bit better here over the last several weeks as well, which is very important for them. heading on towards the playoffs. This line sort of implies, with the short travel, with the longer travel, the short turnaround, as you mentioned, how the road teams have fared on Thursday nights, it does look light. And it does look like the Chargers are getting a lot of respect out there in the betting market. Maybe Kansas City isn't getting the same level of respect that they got earlier on in the year. And it's such a fascinating game. And it's really a shame that this game is on Thursday night because it is far and away, the best game of Week 15. And it's on a short week with some injury concerns for both teams here. Maybe Melvin Gordon can go. Maybe he can't. Maybe Eric Berry comes back. Maybe he doesn't. Tyreek Hill is obviously banged up, as you mentioned. It's a shame that this game is on Thursday night. But if Kansas City does get this win, does cover the number, again, this is going to be one of those games where you have to evaluate it a little bit differently than everybody else is going to, because this line to me right now suggests that the Chargers are the closest team to Kansas City in the AFC. This is their closest competition with the state of the conference right now. And if the Chiefs take care of business here, I think that says a whole hell of a lot about them as they start to roll towards the playoffs.
No, it would be a big win, but yeah, I don't get the line. Maybe the Patriots, but still, once again, this is at Arrowhead. It doesn't make sense. I would assume it'd be a little closer to the 5 or something, but what do I know? I'm just trying to figure out why in the heck the Steelers and Pats even lost last week. I know it's a look ahead, but so many things. If I just look at a Chargers team that let so many scores up against the Bengals, I know maybe they're thinking a week in advance, but still, that's not a good look for Phillip Rivers in that offense against a defense that's pretty much lifeless.
Well, a defense that's not lifeless belongs to the Chicago Bears, and they took care of business last night against the Rams. It wasn't pretty. It was turnover-filled. Obviously, the cold weather seemed to have an impact. Mitch Trubisky coming back looked a little bit rusty there as well. But I think from a Bears standpoint here, obviously getting the win is fantastic. But you shut down Jared Goff, you shut down Todd Gurley, and against a defense that you can run the football on, Jordan Howard actually had 5.3 yards per carry. You had 5.5 as a team. I think in terms of games that meant something last weekend, I just talked about the Chiefs and how much that win meant. This win from the Chicago Bears was the most impressive of the weekend. So what does this say to you about the Rams, Joe?
It's tough because this is a little tough spot, the weather, the defense, and all this. And I'll admit, the Rams, they just got beat up. The Bears went out and executed the classic standard pregame coach speak of, well, we want to run the ball and we want to stop the run. And who said that? They all say that. It's the same damn thing, but the Bears actually went out and did it, so they deserve it. But I hate the narrative that Jared Goff can't play in the cold, because watch all Trubisky's throws and tell me he's a great cold weather quarterback. I think that cold affected both those passers, and there's a reason there were 6 or 7 interceptions in the whole game. So I don't want to hear a ton of that, but I will have to admit Goff did struggle. It's just the timing is the undoing of it. And Hicks and Mack, that combo, we've said it ad nauseum on this show. Those two are deadly together, and I think there's only a few quarterbacks that could make those throws work against that kind of pass rush. And then shuffling the linemen, losing Sullivan, and then Roger Saffold, he's a big part of their running game. He's just a big thug from IU. He's pulling around the edge, walling people off. He's that physical presence next to Whitworth that makes their left side so dominant at times, and that's where they had trouble getting Gurley's pace. I think they really missed him. And then what's really real is the Rams are just too damn thin. I think their roster is starting to show up. The lack of depth they have at wide receiver behind all the front 5 starters in the offensive line. I think linebackers still, a lot of unproven guys behind Ekubben, and then Fowler that they just acquired. Fowler looks like he's really grasped that system, but I think they're thin at corner too behind Peters and Talib. So that's as we get to this war of attrition down the line, like that's where it's starting to show up, and the big one is Cooper Kupp. I've got to fess up. I wasn't ready to admit how important that was and realize what he meant to Goff and McVay in a sense of reliability, trust, and just getting fucking open. I don't care what this kid's time speed. I don't care how good he looks. I don't care what he looks like. Cup gets open. Woods, Cooksey, Reynolds, they were having issues all night. They couldn't get open against that Chicago secondary. And as good as how much money Brandon Cooks makes and how open he gets, like that should be the ultimate assessment of what we're getting paid here at wide receiver. How open do you really get? And I know it's a timing issue with Goff, but I think those receivers were having some problems, and that's what we should be celebrating here is Vic Fangio and how great he is at getting quarterbacks off schedule, at getting routes changed and redirected. He deserves kudos. So in the variety of packages, it's not just zone. There's a bunch of man he's running. It keeps quarterbacks guessing. So I think personnel, though, Chicago, what they've got, the speed at linebacker, and that secondary is just playing so friggin' confident that I almost don't care what the offense is doing. Still, I'm not sold on Trubisky. And basically this night comes down to it. Chicago defense, won. They beat them up, and then Matt Nagy won up Sean McVay in the duel of headset Waffle House menu play callers there. That play call for the touchdown with Santa's little helper or Santa's sleigh or whatever he calls it, that's pretty slick.
Well, and I think you look at this game too, and one of the things that I noticed as this one was playing out, I mean, yeah, it was a tough night for Goff, and there's all the draft stuff about his hand size and all those types of things. But I think something about this game too is the Bears play physical on the edges, and the Rams do not have a lot of size at wide receiver. They don't have a lot of physical wide receivers at all. In fact, some of their guys are relatively undersized. I mean, probably the biggest wide receiver that they have, and he's kind of more of a possession guy. He's not a real physical type of dude either. So that was something that really impressed me about the Bears last night, getting a chance to watch them, is they're fast on defense, they're relentless with the pass rush, but also, because of their team speed, they're not worried to play press coverage. They're not worried to play physical and maybe, have a speedier guy get behind a corner because their safeties can close on the football. So one of the things I think that was a problem for the Rams last night, and with some of these new age coaches like a McVay, stuff like that, a lot of it is timing oriented. And when you play physical on the edges, you give timing offenses problems. You interrupt that timing. And that's why Goff was premature on some of those throws, just expecting guys to be there. And instead, a guy in a black shirt was there. So that's something to watch if these two teams do meet in the playoffs. And further, something to watch with Chicago in the playoffs going forward is I don't think a lot of wide receiver cores can really handle their physicality on the edges, and you factor in a pass rush that's as good as theirs, this Chicago defense can take this team places. I don't know if Mitch Trubisky can. I don't know if he can maximize, his possessions offensively in the playoffs, but the Bears' physicality really stood out in this game yesterday, and the problem for the Rams in this regard, and we kind of saw this last year when they lost in the first round of the playoffs, is that you can't replicate that in practice. So I don't know what they're going to do to sort of change that if they run into a really physical defense here. Like if a Minnesota gets in or, obviously if they play Chicago here, I don't know what the Rams can do to counteract that.
No, it's tough, and I think what happened here, they met their doppelganger. They met a defense just as strong and stout, led by a guru that is basically leading his whole package out there while the play caller goes and meets with the offense and figures it out and leaves the team in control of Fangio. It's exactly the same thing that's happening, but you're right. It's just a more effective method on defense. Those corners they're rerouting people. They're getting those routes completely off schedule, and then the quarterback, it's almost impossible with that pressure at the same time. So yeah, I think those safeties are playing great, Jackson and Amos, and as long as they've got those corners, it also helps. They're awful healthy on that side of the ball. I think the only injury right now, what do they got, is Floyd. So if they get him healthy too, that's that defense at full bore is awful hard for any team to take.
Well, the Pittsburgh Steelers suffered a pretty bad loss over the weekend. Now, from the standpoint of the AFC North, They're still up half game on Baltimore, and certainly the Ravens squandered a chance yesterday. But for the Steelers here, going out west to Oakland, and we talked about this spot a little bit last week with you, with some of the other guests we had, including Brent from DSI. Horrible spot for Pittsburgh. Their rivalry game on deck, huge game for them. Somebody has revenge in that game every single year. They sleptwalked a little bit through this game, but also, too, Antonio Brown with 5 catches for 35 yards. Roethlisberger leaving this game for a little while. Nobody covering Jared Cook. No running game whatsoever. Not a great look for Pittsburgh, but you're going to take a little bit more of an optimistic approach here.
I am, and it is a bad look. And I know I'm running out of excuses for these Steelers, but I'm not ready to throw them in the trash yet. I think what we saw here, too, not to be underscored, was a great effort by a team that's got a little bit of a history with the Steelers, dating back to those Al Davis days, how many times these teams met in the postseason, and it means something to a guy like Gruden. No, the players don't have a friggin' clue about it, but he was ready for this game, and it showed. And I think that corner from Ohio State, Conley, had a great game on Antonio Brown. It'd be nice to just get that again isolated with his snaps on Brown. Up right and towards till the end there, but he was just on him like glue. I thought he was outstanding. And then some takeaway I've got from Oakland is that Gruden's just doing one hell of a job scripting these plays. In the first drive in particular, I looked at the last 4 drive charts. The Raiders have scored a touchdown on the first drive in 3 of those last 4 games. The only exception is that Kansas City game, and open series was a little bit of a disaster. But it's been his scripting has not gone anywhere. His game prep and planning and spacing, it's a joy to watch. Some of the plays and how he sets things up and how many different packages he runs in that first set and series. He's still a mastermind. He's a horrible personnel manager, but it be as may, X's and O's is still something he'll always have back of his hand. He's never going to forget, like riding a bicycle. So I think the pass rusher and maybe a game-changing wide receiver might put them in the playoffs or something. I don't know. But leaving them aside, I think the Steelers, a horrible start behind the chains, down penalties, and let's be honest, they can't cover anybody. Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown don't play cornerback or safety. I think that's really this Steelers defense. That's who needs to go to the woodshed here. I will tell the truth. They miss James Conner. The running game is not the same with Samuels and Ridley, and it's similar to Kansas City. They're going to have to use a few guys, different roles, different guys. I think Samuels, though, as a pass catcher, it's not as big a drop-off as some would think in how many positions he'd played. I just think, losing their quarterback the majority of that second half, and I'm with you. I think that being a little cavalier there, not putting him back in. It looked like Roethlisberger was ready to get back in, and Tomlin claims they had rid. I don't buy that for a second. I think they're assuming they didn't have to get him out there. They're thinking about New England. So, it's just they also do have to set Marcus Gilbert, that right tackle, being out still. I think that's a little underlying current. Everyone's refusing to talk about. But, with the Patriots game coming up, I think that's why Ben doesn't come in. And then that freaking kicker losing his plant foot on the baseball. Can we just do away with all baseball stadiums, football games at baseball stadiums like that? I love baseball and respect it, but it's a different field, different surface. That Oakland, that whole situation has been a problem the whole time. But I think the biggest issue I'm finding with the Steelers is still a secondary. Not a lot of those guys want to tackle. They still don't have their pass rush figured out. So it's mostly defense, but I still believe they can score with anybody as long as Ben's right. I don't know that this rib issue is as big a deal as what they made it out to be, and that's the only fishy thing I can't figure out is why he doesn't come back in right off the bat. And it's we're in trouble. Well, Ben, we need you now. That's what cost them the game, and it's just real head scratcher that Tomlin's willing to be that. Like I said, cavalier. That's risking potential spot in the playoffs. If Miami keeps winning out, they're in friggin' trouble.
Well, and of course, the Raiders don't have to worry about the playing surface since they'll be in Oakland or in Las Vegas here soon enough. So at least there's that as Oakland goes forward. But one last team to talk about here. The Carolina Panthers dropped to 1-6 away from Charlotte here. They're now 6-7, falling to the Cleveland Browns 26-20. Good for the Browns to pick up a nice win here. But you see a lot going on with the Panthers.
It hurts to see Panthers lose 5 in a row, man, because I respect Riverboat Ron. But I'm starting to worry. Because there's so much better than this. But that new owner doesn't know Ron Rivera. He didn't bring him in. He didn't hire. He doesn't know him anything. So what's the Tepper? He's a hedge fund manager. He's a business type. I mean, he's worried about analytics, synergy, and stupid buzzwords that everybody loves. He's not worried about Rivera and football. And I hope we're not seeing the end of this little regime here. Is what I'm starting to worry about, finishing this poorly. 5 in a row, that's inexcusable, and how bad they are away from Carolina. And now there's just a fad with the NFL. The type of coach that's in vogue is that offensive guru, the quarterback whisperer, chalkboard genius. Like I said, the Waffle House menu play callers are in vogue, and Rivera doesn't fit that mold. So I'm just not sure that bringing in Norvell Turner was the way to go. Some of the parts of this offense, yes, injuries, but everyone's getting hit hard by injuries. I think that missing the vertical threat of Cam is what's really hurting the offense. But still, the lack of being a 60-minute team, man, they come out flat in the second half. And they've got guys like Christian McCaffrey, Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore. On the basis of metrics and spark ratings, they're off the charts. And I saw DJ Moore get caught from behind. I don't see Christian McCaffrey blowing up against Curtis Samuel. Like, that's one of the fastest guys on the field flat out. I mean, that guy can literally fly. So I don't know where they're at conditioning, and that is what shocks me probably the most, is that a team like Carolina that has been the distance, made it to a Super Bowl, qualified for the playoffs with the start they had, like where they're showing up now in the second half of games. It's just a credit to the Browns, though, not to be lost. Big home win. And that's a talented team they beat, getting Jarvis Landry back involved. And I saw Treader, Hubbard, and Batonio looking pretty good on that offensive line. There's a lot of good things to take away if you're a Browns fan, but I think they just beat up on a team that isn't ready to play a full game, and that's so troubling. It really is. Where they're at conditioning, where they're at mentally, it strikes me as that stay off the limits from Carolina. But now I'm starting to look at this as just I don't know if I can trust them completely, but it's out of playoff contention now. It's now they're likely that team we talked to Chats. They may start worrying about the survival rate of their coach and their spot and the defense they run. I mean, this is Kuechly's defense they've been running since they drafted him, and all these guys fit in parts of this. And if that crumbles, where's Kuechly fit? Where's Thomas Davis fit? Where's Pawan Short fit? Like, it all is like a horrible Jenga maze that will fall apart if Rivera gets fired. So I think, as crazy as it sounds, man, Carolina might just start putting in some solid effort, knowing that it's not about extending the season or playing for tomorrow. It's about having a year next year and having a contract and not moving out of the house. So I think that's going to start coming to a point for the Panthers and just where they're at as a franchise. And I'm just saying, I hope they don't move on from Rivera, because that's just a heck of a coach who'd get a job, I mean, at the drop of a hat. As soon as that announcement's made, he's going to be taking some interview if he wants them.
Joe Everett, who's working and find at DraftScouts and Insider Football. What do you got going on right now, Joe?
Well, officially making those reservations in Mobile, getting ready for the circuit, declaring all the underclassmen at DraftScouts, and then also, not to be forgotten, the thick of the fantasy playoffs. Go to Insider Football, win your season with us.
You can follow Joe's work on Twitter at Joe W. Everett. Joe, appreciate the time as always, sir. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right, looking forward to it.